Why did a 70-year-old sheikh witness the floor of the mosque split open when he recited Allah's name for the 1000th time? What did he see emerging from beneath that made every person in the congregation fall to their knees in tears? This story is so powerful and spiritually shaking that you will never forget it. That's why I'm asking you to listen until the very end, because what was revealed that night changed the fate of an entire city. The date was November 15th, 2019. The place was Masjid al-Qaid Ibrahim in Alexandria, Egypt, a mosque that had stood for over 400 years, watching empires rise and fall, witnessing prayers from countless generations of believers. Sheikh Ahmad al-Masri, 70 years old, stood before the mihrab after Isha prayer. His voice, weathered by age but still strong with conviction, filled the ancient hall. He had been reciting, La ilaha illa Allah, there is no God but Allah, every night after prayer for exactly 40 years, 1,000 times each night, never missing a single day. Tonight was the night of the 1,000,000th recitation. As his trembling lips formed the words for the final time, the marble floor beneath his feet began to crack. A sound like thunder echoed through the mosque. The congregation of nearly 200 men froze in terror as the ground split open, revealing something that had been buried beneath the mosque for centuries. What emerged from that darkness would prove that sometimes devotion doesn't just move hearts, it moves the earth itself. Before I continue with what happened that night, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel right now and leave a comment telling me which country you're watching from. Your engagement helps these stories of faith reach believers around the world who need to hear them. Now, to understand the magnitude of what occurred, you need to know who Sheikh Ahmad really was. He wasn't born into privilege or religious authority. Ahmad grew up in a poor fishing family in a small village outside Alexandria. His father died when he was 12, leaving him as the eldest of 6 children. While other boys his age were memorizing Quran in madrasa, Ahmad was working on fishing boats, his hands bleeding from nets and salt water, trying to keep his family from starvation. But every night, no matter how exhausted, no matter how much his body ached, young Ahmad would sit alone by the shore and recite La ilaha illa Allah 1,000 times. He had no sheikh to teach him, no religious education, no understanding of complex theology. He only knew this: Allah is one, and that truth was worth repeating. When he turned 30, after his siblings had grown and married, Ahmad finally had time to pursue knowledge. He enrolled in Al-Azhar University, the oldest in the world, and despite being older than most students, despite his rough fisherman's hands and his lack of formal education, he excelled. His professors were amazed by his understanding, his humility, his ability to see the deeper meanings in sacred texts. This man, one professor said, has been taught by Allah himself. Ahmad eventually became an imam, then a sheikh, respected throughout Alexandria for his wisdom and his extraordinary devotion. But he never forgot his promise. Every single night for 40 years he recited Allah's name 1,000 times, in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow, when his wife died, when his son was born, when war came to Egypt, when peace returned, the recitation never stopped. Why do you do this? His students would ask. You have memorized the entire Quran. You have mastered fiqh and tafsir. Why do you still sit like a simple man and repeat the same words? Ahmad would smile and say, because I am a simple man, and the simple truth is all I need. But not everyone in Alexandria admired Sheikh Ahmad's devotion. In fact, there were those who thought his nightly ritual was excessive, perhaps even bid'ah, an innovation in religion. The opposition came from an unexpected source: Sheikh Mahmud al-Rashid, a younger, more prominent scholar who had gained fame through his fiery sermons and his popular social media presence. He represented the new generation of Islamic scholarship, educated, articulate, media-savvy, and absolutely certain of his interpretations. 3 months before that fateful November night, Sheikh Mahmud publicly criticized Ahmad during a Friday khutbah at his own mosque across the city. Brothers and sisters, he proclaimed from the minbar, we must be careful not to fall into ritualistic practices that have no basis in authentic hadith, reciting La ilaha illa Allah 1,000 times every night. Show me where the Prophet, peace be upon him, commanded this. Show me where the Sahaba did this. This is the path of Sufism, of innovations that dilute the pure Islam. The speech went viral. Videos spread across Egyptian social media. Comment sections exploded with debate. Traditional scholars defended Ahmad. Modern reformers sided with Mahmud. The Muslim community of Alexandria, once united, began to fracture along lines of interpretation and practice. Ahmad's students begged him to respond, to defend himself, to engage in the public debate. "Sheikh, you must answer these accusations. People are saying you're misleading the Ummah." But Ahmad simply smiled that patient smile and said, "If Allah is pleased with my devotion, why should I concern myself with the opinions of men? I will let my actions speak. On the night of my 1 millionth recitation, Allah will answer for me." His students didn't understand. How could they? They didn't know what Sheikh Ahmad knew, that something had been waiting beneath that mosque for 400 years, waiting for a voice pure enough, a heart devoted enough, to finally set it free. What Sheikh Ahmad never told anyone was that he had a secret reason for his devotion. 50 years ago, when he was still a young fisherman, Ahmad had experienced something that changed his life forever. One night, after his usual recitations by the sea, an old man appeared seemingly from nowhere. His clothes were ancient, his face ageless, and his eyes held depths of knowledge that frightened young Ahmad. "Do you know why you recite, boy?" the old man asked. "To remember Allah," Ahmad replied, his voice shaking. The stranger smiled. "You recite because one day your voice will be the key. Beneath the old mosque in Alexandria, there is a soul that has been trapped for 4 centuries. A believer who was wrongly imprisoned in the earth by a jealous sorcerer. Only the voice of someone who has recited Allah's name 1 million times with a pure heart can break the seal." Ahmad thought he had dreamed it, but the next morning he found something in the sand where the old man had stood, a piece of ancient parchment with Arabic script so old it was barely readable. It contained a prayer and a promise. When the earth hears the name of Allah spoken with perfect devotion 1 million times, it will open, and what was buried will be freed. For 40 years, Ahmad kept this secret, not even telling his wife or children. He didn't know if it was true or a test of his faith, but he recited anyway because, even if the promise was false, the devotion to Allah was real. Now, as he stood before the congregation on the night of his 1 millionth recitation, that ancient parchment was folded in his pocket, yellowed and fragile but still intact. The question that haunted him was, would anything actually happen? Or had he devoted 40 years to chasing a vision from his youth? In moments he would have his answer. The Isha prayer that night had been unusually crowded. Word had spread throughout Alexandria's Muslim community that Sheikh Ahmad would complete his 1 millionth recitation. Some came out of genuine respect, others came out of curiosity. A few came hoping to see the old sheikh's practice exposed as meaningless. Among the congregation was Abdullah Hassan, a young engineer and part-time videographer who documented religious events for his YouTube channel. He had positioned his camera on a tripod at the back of the mosque, intending to capture what he assumed would be an ordinary, if sentimental, moment. Sheikh Mahmoud al-Rashid, the critic, was also there, standing in the back row with his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. He had announced his intention to attend on social media. "I will witness this so-called special recitation and see if anything miraculous occurs," as some claim. Islam is not about magic, it is about following the Sunnah. As Sheikh Ahmad stood at the mihrab and began his recitations, his voice steady despite his age, the mosque fell into profound silence. Even those who had come to mock found themselves moved by the purity of his devotion. La ilaha illa Allah. La ilaha illa Allah. La ilaha illa Allah. By the 500th recitation, some men were crying, though they couldn't explain why. By the 800th, the air in the mosque felt charged, electric, as if every molecule was waiting. By the 990th, even Sheikh Mahmud had uncrossed his arms, his skepticism replaced by something he couldn't quite name. And then, as Sheikh Ahmad's voice formed the words for the 1 millionth time, La ilaha illa Allah, the ground shook. Not a small tremor, a profound shaking that made the ancient chandeliers swing wildly, that sent men scrambling for balance. The marble floor directly beneath Sheikh Ahmad cracked with a sound like a gunshot. A fissure appeared, spreading like a spider's web, and then, impossibly terrifyingly, the floor began to sink, creating an opening. Abdullah's camera captured everything. Light emerged from the opening, not the yellow light of electricity, but a pure white radiance that seemed to come from another realm entirely. And then, from that impossible opening, a figure began to rise. What rose from beneath the mosque floor wasn't human, at least not entirely. The figure was tall, composed of light that shifted and moved like water. Its form was vaguely human but translucent, ethereal, clearly not made of flesh. As it fully emerged, hovering a foot above the broken marble, the congregation could see that it had a face, a beautiful, terrible face, filled with such profound sadness that grown men began to weep without understanding why. "Jinn!" someone screamed. "A jinn has been released!" Panic erupted. Men scrambled toward the exits, prayers of protection spilling from their lips. "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim." But Sheikh Ahmad didn't move. He stood before the being of light, tears streaming down his weathered face, and he smiled. "You are free," he whispered. The being of light turned its luminous gaze upon the old sheikh, and when it spoke, its voice resonated through the mosque like a choir of instruments, neither male nor female, but something beyond human categorization. "For 400 years I have waited," it said in perfect Arabic. 400 years in darkness, sealed by black magic, unable to pray, unable to call upon my Lord. The sorcerer who imprisoned me said only one thing could break the seal. A human voice, speaking Allah's name 1,000,000 times with a heart free of worldly desire. He meant it as an impossible condition. He didn't account for someone like you. Sheikh Mahmud, still present despite the panic, found his voice. "Who? What are you?" The being turned toward him, and in that gaze the younger sheikh saw his own arrogance reflected back. "I am Yusuf ibn Harith, a jinn who accepted Islam in the time of the great scholar Al-Ghazali. I devoted my life to worship, to protecting believers, to serving Allah as our kind is commanded in the Quran. But a human sorcerer, jealous of my knowledge and my relationship with the Muslim community, used dark arts to seal me beneath this mosque, believing no human could ever be devoted enough to free me." The being's form flickered, becoming more solid, and the congregation could now see tears, actual tears, streaming down its otherworldly face. "For 400 years, I have been conscious but paralyzed, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to perform salah. Do you understand what that means for a believer? To be aware of every prayer time passing, every Ramadan beginning and ending, every Eid celebration, and to be powerless to participate." The mosque fell into absolute silence. "But I heard every prayer recited in this mosque above me," Yusuf continued, his voice breaking. "I heard every Quran recitation, every cry of a believer in need, every dhikr, and 40 years ago I began to hear a voice that was different, a voice that spoke Allah's name with such purity, such consistency, such devotion, that it began to weaken the seal. That voice was his." The being of light pointed at Sheikh Ahmad, who was now openly sobbing. "Tonight, after 1,000,000 recitations, the seal finally broke, and I am free. After 400 years of imprisonment, I am free to pray again." And then, as the entire congregation watched in awe, the jinn Yusuf turned toward Mecca, raised his hands and began to pray Isha, the prayer he had been unable to perform for 4 centuries. Abdullah's video, uploaded that night with trembling hands, and the title "Jinn Freed in Alexandria Mosque," real footage, went viral within hours. By morning, it had 10 million views. By the end of the week, it had been shared across every Muslim social media platform in the world, dubbed into dozens of languages, analyzed by scholars from Morocco to Malaysia. The Egyptian government sent investigators. Religious authorities from Al-Azhar convened emergency meetings. Scientists demanded to examine the mosque. Skeptics claimed it was an elaborate hoax. Believers praised it as a sign from Allah. But what happened in the days following the event was even more extraordinary than the miracle itself. Yusuf, the freed jinn, didn't disappear. He remained, visible to anyone who entered the mosque, though now his form was less radiant, more solid, appearing almost human except for a faint luminescence that never quite faded. He explained that he had been given permission by Allah to remain in the human realm for a short time, to fulfill a purpose before returning to his own kind. "I have been granted 40 days, Yusuf told the gathering crowds. 40 days to share what I learned in 400 years of forced meditation. 40 days to teach what it means to truly depend on Allah. 40 days to show that faith is not about rituals we understand, but about surrender we practice." News crews from Al Jazeera, BBC Arabic, and dozens of other outlets descended on Alexandria. The small mosque became a pilgrimage site overnight. Muslims from around the world booked flights to Egypt, desperate to witness the freed jinn, to hear his teachings, to understand what his imprisonment and liberation meant for their own faith. But the most significant transformation happened in someone no one expected. Sheikh Mahmud al-Rashid, the young scholar who had so publicly criticized Sheikh Ahmad. 3 days after the event, Mahmoud appeared at Masjid al-Qaid Ibrahim, his head bowed, his face streaked with tears. He walked through the crowd, past the reporters and cameras, and prostrated himself before Sheikh Ahmad. "Forgive me," he said, his voice broken. "I judged what I didn't understand. I called innovation what was actually devotion. I prioritized my knowledge over my humility. I was so concerned with being right that I forgot to be righteous." Sheikh Ahmad raised the younger man to his feet and embraced him. "Brother, you are forgiven. You taught me something too, that even in my devotion I had pride. I knew something miraculous might happen, and part of me wanted it to, so I could be vindicated. We both had lessons to learn." Yusuf, watching this exchange, spoke to the assembled crowd. "This is why I was freed at this precise moment in history, not just for my liberation, but for yours. You have become so divided, traditional versus modern, Sufi versus Salafi, East versus West. You fight over methods while forgetting the purpose." This old man recited 1,000,000 times, not because it was prescribed, but because his heart yearned to, and Allah accepted it. Never let your understanding of Islam become so rigid that you can't recognize genuine devotion when you see it. On the 7th day of his 40-day presence, Yusuf made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the Muslim world. "I have been shown something while I was imprisoned," he said during a gathering that was broadcast live across the globe. "A vision of what is coming. I am compelled to share it before I return to my realm." The crowd leaned in. Millions watching online held their breath. There will come a time, and it is not far, when Muslims will face their greatest test. Not persecution from outside, but division from within. You will fracture into so many groups, each claiming the only truth, that you will forget you worship the same God. Brothers will declare other brothers non-believers over minor disagreements. Muslims will harm other Muslims more than any outside enemy could. His voice grew heavy with sorrow. "And in that time of greatest division, Allah will send reminders, not grand miracles that force belief, but subtle signs that require humility to recognize. Some of these signs will come from the most unexpected sources, from those you dismiss, from practices you mock, from people you consider unworthy." He turned his luminous gaze to the cameras, seeming to look through them to the millions watching worldwide. "The question is, will you be humble enough to recognize these signs, or will you be like the scholars of old who rejected prophets because they didn't fit their expectations?" "What should we do?" someone in the crowd called out. "How do we prepare?" Yusuf smiled sadly. "Do what Sheikh Ahmad did. Find one simple truth and cling to it with absolute devotion. Let your practice be so consistent, so pure, so free of showing off, that it becomes a prayer in itself. Allah doesn't need your 1,000,000 recitations, but you need the heart that 1,000,000 recitations creates." Then he revealed something that made global headlines. "In 9 more days, on the 16th day of my presence, something else will occur in this mosque. Those who are here will witness something that will either strengthen their faith or challenge their understanding completely. I cannot tell you what it is. I've been forbidden, but I can tell you this. It will answer the question that every believer eventually asks." "What question?" the crowd demanded. "The question of whether Allah still performs miracles in this modern age, or if we are alone, abandoned to science and reason, with our faith relegated to ancient history." The mosque erupted in speculation. What would happen? Another jinn freed? A dead person resurrected? A voice from heaven? But Yusuf would say nothing more. He simply smiled and said, "Wait, and prepare your hearts for whatever comes." The countdown began. 9 days until the next miracle. 9 days for the world to watch Alexandria. As the world's attention focused on Alexandria and the approaching 16th day, media outlets sought interviews with Sheikh Ahmad. He declined most, but finally agreed to speak with a single journalist from Al Jazeera, on the condition that the interview take place in his simple home, not in the mosque that had become a circus. The interviewer, Sister Layla Mahmoud, found Sheikh Ahmad in his small kitchen, preparing tea with his own aged hands. "Sheikh Ahmad," she began, "the entire Muslim world is calling you a saint, a wali of Allah. They're saying your devotion freed a jinn, that you've brought miracles back to our time. How do you respond?" Ahmad smiled gently, pouring tea into 2 chipped glasses. "I am not a saint. I am a fisherman who learned to recite. The miracle wasn't my devotion. It was Allah's mercy, on both Yusuf and on me. But you recited for 40 years. You never missed a single night. That's extraordinary. Is it? Ahmad set down the teapot and looked at her with eyes that held depths of wisdom. Sister, every Muslim is commanded to pray 5 times daily. Most of us do, never missing. We don't call that extraordinary. We call it obligation. My 1,000 recitations were my personal obligation, something between Allah and me. I don't deserve praise for doing what my heart demanded. The young Sheikh Mahmoud al-Rashid called your practice bid'ah, innovation. How did that make you feel? Ahmad was quiet for a long moment, sipping his tea. It made me examine my intentions. Was I reciting to be seen, to be praised, to prove something? And I realized that yes, there was some ego in it. I wanted vindication. So in a way, Sheikh Mahmoud did me a service. He held up a mirror to my soul. And now that the miracle has happened, now the ego has a new test, the test of being called miraculous. It's much harder to stay humble when the world is calling you a saint than when they're calling you misguided. Layla leaned forward. Sheikh Ahmad, Yusuf said something else will happen in 9 days. Do you know what it is? The old sheikh's eyes glistened with tears. Yes, Allah has shown me, and it is not what anyone expects. Will you tell me? I cannot, but I can tell you this. What will happen will challenge many people's faith, because it will reveal that Allah's mercy is far wider than our tiny understanding. Many will be angry. Many will deny. But some, those with hearts still soft, will finally understand what Islam truly means. What does it mean? Ahmad smiled through his tears. Submission, not to rules and regulations, though they have their place, but submission to the truth that Allah is greater than all our categories, all our labels, all our certainty. Allah is the greatest isn't just something we say in prayer. It's the truth we must live, that He is greater than our understanding of Him. The interview ended there, but those words, Allah is greater than our understanding of Him, would be repeated millions of times in the coming days. They would become a prayer, a meditation, and for some, a warning. The 16 days of Yusuf's presence transformed Egypt. Tourism to Alexandria increased by 400%. Hotels were fully booked. The Egyptian government, seeing an opportunity, declared the mosque a national heritage site and began organizing tours. Street vendors sold Miracle of Alexandria merchandise, T-shirts, prayer beads, even bottled water claiming to be from the mosque's taps. But beneath the commercialization, something profound was happening in the hearts of ordinary Muslims. Mosques across Egypt and eventually across the Muslim world reported dramatic increases in attendance. Young people who hadn't prayed in years returned to Salah. Families began gathering for Quran recitation. Facebook groups dedicated to personal dhikr practices exploded in membership. Sheikh Mahmoud al-Rashid, completely transformed by the event, started a new series of lectures titled The Humility Revolution. He spoke about the dangers of religious arrogance, the importance of recognizing genuine devotion even when it doesn't fit our frameworks, and the need for the Ummah to reunite across sectarian lines. I was more concerned with being right than with being righteous, he said in one lecture that went viral. I forgot that the companions themselves disagreed on many matters, but still prayed behind one another. When did we lose that generous spirit? But not everyone was pleased. Conservative scholars issued fatwas questioning the authenticity of the event. Some called it a deception of shaitan designed to mislead believers. Others warned that focusing on miracles and karamat was a dangerous deviation from proper Islam. The debate raged across social media, in mosques, in homes. Muslims were divided, not just on the interpretation of the event, but on what it meant for their understanding of faith in the modern world. And then, on the morning of the 16th day, Yusuf gathered everyone in the mosque for an announcement. Tonight, after Maghrib prayer, the final sign will be revealed. I ask that only those with sincere intention be present. No cameras, no reporters, no one seeking spectacle. Only those who truly want to understand Allah's mercy. But of course, cameras were hidden anyway. The world wouldn't miss this for anything. The mosque was packed for Maghrib prayer on the 16th day. Sheikh Ahmad led the prayer, his voice strong despite his age, despite the weight of expectation crushing down on the building. When the prayer concluded, Yusuf stood before the congregation. His luminous form seemed brighter, more solid than it had been in days. My time is almost finished, he said. Tomorrow at dawn, I will return to my realm, my 40 days complete. But before I go, I was commanded to show you something. Not to prove Allah's power, that needs no proof, but to teach you about His mercy. He gestured to the opening in the floor, which had never been repaired. It still gaped open, revealing darkness below. "There is one more who has been imprisoned beneath this mosque, one more who needs to be freed." The crowd murmured. Another jinn, another believer trapped by sorcery. Youssef raised his hands, and the darkness below began to glow with that same pure white light. Slowly something began to rise from the depths, but this time it wasn't a being of light. It was solid, human, a woman. She emerged from the opening dressed in clothes from another era, simple, worn, covered in dust. Her face was weathered, her hair grey, but her eyes held the depth of someone who had seen beyond the veil of this world. The congregation gasped. Sheikh Ahmad fell to his knees, his hands covering his mouth. "This," Youssef said, "is Miriam bint Khalil. 400 years ago, she was a Christian woman who served the poor in this city. She gave her wealth to orphans, her time to the sick, her compassion to everyone regardless of faith. When the sorcerer who imprisoned me learned she was secretly giving food to the Muslim families he was persecuting, he sealed her in this same prison as punishment." The mosque erupted in confusion. "A Christian? How can this be? Why would Allah free a non-Muslim?" Youssef raised his hand for silence. "She has been conscious these 400 years, just as I was. Unable to move, unable to speak, only able to hear the prayers recited above. And do you know what she told me in the darkness of our shared prison? She said, 'I may not be Muslim, but I believe there is only one God, and if these prayers are reaching him, then I am content to hear them.'" Tears streamed down Miriam's face as she looked at the congregation, seeing the modern world for the first time in 4 centuries. "She couldn't recite the Shahada," Youssef continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "She was sealed in spiritual paralysis just as I was, but her heart believed, and tonight she is given a choice." He turned to Miriam and spoke gently. "You are free. You may return to the world you knew, to the faith you practiced, or you may embrace what your heart has known these 400 years. The choice is yours alone." The mosque held its breath. Miriam looked at Sheikh Ahmad, at the congregation, at the mihrab pointing toward Mecca. Then, in a voice rusty from 400 years of silence, she spoke in ancient Arabic, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulu Allah." I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. The mosque exploded. Some people cheered, others cried. A few walked out in protest, unable to accept what they'd witnessed. But Sheikh Ahmad stood, walked to Miriam and embraced her as a sister in faith. "Welcome," he whispered. "Welcome home." Youssef smiled, his form beginning to fade. "This is why I was freed, not just for my liberation, but to teach this lesson. Allah's mercy encompasses all things. He guides whom He wills in ways we cannot understand or predict. You spend so much time debating who is Muslim enough, who practices correctly, who has the right beliefs. But Allah sees the hearts. And sometimes the heart of a Christian serving the poor contains more Islam than the heart of a Muslim persecuting others." His light grew dimmer. "My time is finished. But remember this. When you judge others, when you declare someone outside of mercy, you make yourself God's rival, not His servant. Trust Allah with His judgments. Your job is only to worship Him and be kind to His creation." And then, as the first call of Fajr echoed across Alexandria, Youssef disappeared, returning to his realm, his debt of 400 years finally repaid. 5 years have passed since that night in Alexandria. The mosque still stands, more beautiful than ever, with the opening in the floor preserved behind glass as a reminder. Miriam bint Khalil, now known as Miriam al-Muslima, lived for 3 more years after her conversion. She spent those years teaching, sharing her story, speaking about mercy and faith that transcends labels. When she died, thousands attended her funeral. Muslims, Christians, people of all faiths coming to honor a woman who had suffered 400 years of imprisonment, yet emerged with nothing but love in her heart. Sheikh Ahmad passed away peacefully in his sleep 6 months after Miriam. His funeral was attended by over 100,000 people, including Sheikh Mahmud al-Rashid, who delivered a eulogy that made even the strongest men weep. "He was just a fisherman who learned to recite," Mahmud said, "but his devotion freed not 1, but 2 souls from darkness, and in doing so, he freed all of us from the narrow prisons of our own certainty." The mosque now has a plaque with Sheikh Ahmad's final words, which he spoke the day before he died. "I recited for 40 years, waiting for a miracle. The miracle wasn't that the earth opened. The miracle was that my heart stayed soft. The story of Alexandria teaches us several truths that we must carry in our hearts. First, true devotion needs no audience. Sheikh Ahmad recited for 40 years before anyone knew, before anyone cared, before any miracle occurred. He did it because his heart demanded it, not because the world was watching. In our age of social media, where every prayer is posted and every good deed is broadcast, remember that the most powerful worship happens in the silence between you and Allah. Second, never judge the path by which someone reaches the truth. Miriam didn't recite Shahada for 400 years, yet her heart believed. How many people do you know who recite Shahada daily, but whose hearts remain hard? Allah guides through infinite paths. Your job isn't to judge those paths, it's to walk your own with sincerity. Third, consistency matters more than intensity. 1,000 recitations every single night for 40 years, never missing once, created something more powerful than 1,000,000 recitations done once in a burst of emotion. Whatever practice you choose, Quran, dhikr, charity, anything, make it consistent. The water that flows constantly will carve through the mountain. The flood that comes once leaves no lasting mark. Fourth, humility is the gateway to all other virtues. Sheikh Mahmud was more knowledgeable than Ahmad in formal scholarship, but Ahmad was more humble, and humility is the foundation of wisdom. When you find yourself certain that you're right and everyone else is wrong, remember Mahmud's transformation. True knowledge makes you more uncertain, more humble, more aware of how little you understand. Fifth, Allah's mercy is infinitely greater than our understanding. The fact that a Christian woman who served the poor was freed alongside a Muslim jinn who worshipped for centuries challenges our comfortable categories. It reminds us that Allah sees what we cannot, the intentions, the struggles, the sincerity of hearts. Never declare anyone beyond mercy, because you don't have that authority. If this story has touched your heart, I ask you to share it. Not for my benefit, but because there are people in your life, Muslims who have become hopeless, Christians who are curious, atheists who are searching, who need to hear that miracles still happen, that devotion still matters, that mercy still encompasses all things. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories that challenge your assumptions and deepen your faith. Leave a comment telling me, what is your 1,000 recitations? What practice, what devotion, what simple truth will you cling to with the same consistency that Sheikh Ahmad showed? And most importantly, whose heart have you judged too harshly? Who have you declared beyond mercy? After hearing about Miriam, can you soften toward them? The opening in the mosque floor in Alexandria is still there, preserved behind glass. Pilgrims come from around the world to see it, to remember that the earth itself will move when faith is real enough, consistent enough, humble enough. But the true opening wasn't in the marble. It was in hearts, hearts that learned to hold mercy larger than certainty, devotion deeper than dogma, and faith stronger than fear. May Allah make us among those whose hearts stay soft, whose devotion stays consistent, and whose mercy reflects even a fraction of His infinite compassion. Ameen.